Hi there guys, so welcome back, and what I've done is I've come straight back into our decloaking scene and I've just saved it as a new version 10 and changed it to EMP. So we'll just be working in the same scene, and ordinarily I guess if I was doing this at work I would have a separate scene for each different type of effect. But I don't think it hurts building off of the same scene, and we might need to transfer some of the effects from the first half of the shot into the second, so like in terms of lighting and stuff like that. So for now I think we're good to just carry on from the same scene. I've just made sure everything's off that we don't need, so I've switched off these geolights. We're not looking at any of the decloaking effects, and we're just looking at the drone cache. So the original cache itself. Other than that, I've rendered out the full sequence of the environment, so I do have the entire shot rendered out of the environment and the drone. So those both exist for a time when we start doing our test compositing. So even if we end up needing to re-render some of that stuff, if we add geolights relating to the EMP, then that's fine. At least there's something there for now to do some test comping with. So for start, in this video, I just want to make sure that we're up to a point where we feel comfortable moving on to the more effects side of things. So what we need to do first is make sure that we have some spheres animating in a way that we want. So I'll talk a little bit about the thought process here, and this is just the proxy animation I'm going to remove. So we start with basically just a sphere at the origin. The scale probably doesn't matter. I have a rest position just in case. I usually do that. Coloring it blue, and then I positioned it to the location that I think it should be coming from. So if we look at this, I can scale this down, and what I'm imagining is that whatever these things are coming out the front, that's kind of the source of the electromagnetic pulse from the drone. So we'll run with that for now, and as I said in the previous video, the goal from an animation perspective for me is to have this expanding sphere be more like a multiple pulse. So 2 or 3 times, I'm thinking 3 times it should pulse, because 2 would be kind of strange. It feels incomplete. But let's start now anyway, trying to ignore the proxy animation as much as I can. So we have this transform, so that's moving it into position. I'm not going to scale it yet because we need to keyframe that. And then we're good to start working on this shot. So one thing I want to mention about the scale, and it's quite tempting from an animation point of view to think that the sphere should expand exponentially, or should expand very quickly at the start and then slow down. So let's try that first. So right now I'm just choosing a starting frame. So as ever, it's more about feeling like the shot has a good beat. So I know that he lifts his wings up, we pull out, and then we have some anticipation as it charges and then fires. So we can set off something now. Let's go 170. So we'll start from nothing, and then we'll go all the way to the end of the shot and set this at something huge. So enough to cover the background. Now for starters, first thing I'm seeing is I'm scaling from not the center of the sphere. So I'm going to throw in a CEX, CEY, and CEZ just to get the pivot in the correct location. So that looks better. Okay, so now the tempting thing to do is this. We say the sphere should very quickly expand, and then it can slow down. The bigger it gets, the slower it goes. So what's happened here is, well, for starters, it's so fast at the start we don't even see anything. So there's already an artistic problem to that, given the scale of the environment and the position of the camera. And secondly, yes, we can fade off the sphere so that you don't end up seeing it stop. Let's try a tamer example of this where we expand it quite quickly and then we slowly slow down. So once again, we're still too close to actually manage the scale in a way that makes the shot interesting. There's other problems, especially if you're working on in a wide shot. So usually if you're going to see a shockwave like this, and let me just put down a wrangle here and set alpha. So if we imagine a wider shot, there's actually a situation here where you end up seeing what you thought would be an interesting move, which is the slowdown, actually just makes it look wrong at these scales. So it's a bit difficult to pin down exactly why sometimes, and the larger scale we're talking, the more obvious it is that something's wrong if one of these pulse-like things were to have a fast to slow animation. So I've done a few shockwaves before over the years, and it very quickly became apparent that there's no point in doing some kind of fancy speed changes to the animation of this. And maybe this isn't the best shot to demonstrate the full potential problems with doing that. But at the end of the day, a pulse that's released in that fashion from some sci-fi object or real life or whatever, it should just be linear. So the impression you get from something that moves really quickly, and it feels to us like it's slowing down, but that's only because it's getting so far away and so big that it feels like it's covering less space. So let me flip book this. So we only have one pulse for now. So in this sense, it still feels like it's bursting quite quickly at the start because we're quite close to it. And by the time it's moved past the camera and we're looking at the other edge, it actually looks slightly slower. So there's a readability aspect here which we want. So being slower than you think it should be at the start gives us time to look at it, which is probably going to be one of the most interesting parts of the framing. And after it travels past the camera, we get loads of time to still look at it, and there's nothing slowing down or speeding up. It's just perfectly linear. So I just wanted to cover that quickly from an artistic perspective. There's nothing fancy in an expanding pulse. It should just be linear. And obviously you're going to get someone who's specifically asking you to do it one way or another, and that's fine. But for me, doing it the simplest way possible actually has most of the times turned out the best and the one that people like the most. So in this case, I'm going to stick with this linear. And in which case, the biggest decision comes from how big do we want the pulse to be on the first frame we see it. So now we have that linear curve already, we can say we want the first frame to be that small. And then we want the last frame to have just gone past that building, for example. And I can just move these curves around because I am going to also keyframe the alpha to match the line of this curve here. So we want it to start with quite a solid alpha and then end at a place where it's completely transparent. So I could come back here, and if I think the speed looks better down here, then I can do that. So if I feel like it's starting a little bit too early, so nothing to manage there, just the first point and the last point, and that's us. So that's the simplest part. The other thing is I'm going to remove that because here I'll base, and just use an attribute transfer, a attribute create. So if I put down my alpha here, I'm just doing this because I'm too lazy to add a parameter. So we have, say, an alpha of 1 on the first frame, which is actually too far negative now. Something like that. We set that to 1. And then once again, by the time this has hit the last frame, which is 220, the alpha should be completely transparent. And here we can leave in this S-curve will probably work quite well because then there'll be a moment where it gets more transparent, but it's smooth, so it should feel fine. So once you're happy with just 1, the motion of 1, the speed, the timing of the alpha, and I can't really see the alpha going off, so I'm going to switch off the environment light and make the background dark. I still don't see it. I think it's my back faces. There we go. So there we can see the alpha affecting it at about the right time. The other good thing about this is we can set the first one, and once we're happy, just put this, I'm going to put this in a subnet, because this can be our anim here. If we need this motion somewhere else, we can just take this subnet and quickly copy it. So we have a transform scale and the alpha matched with that. So if we come down and make our 3 pulses here, we don't need to change the timings because the timings are going to be only changed afterwards. So our main one is fine. So I'm going to make another one just using a time shift. And this is what I mean. These values will never need to change because we're changing all of the values here. So all I have to do is choose the next good time for this to pulse. And I should probably do the last one first. If I want 3, I need to know when the last one needs to go for it to end at the right time. And what I was saying in the previous video is I want it to end pretty much either on or just after it's left the camera, so that we can feasibly end on a whiteout. So that gives me a few frames to play with over there. The $F minus 46. I'm going to come back here and just make sure this is zeroed off. So that can be our first and last, and because it's a purely electronic pulse, I can set our middle time shift, which is our middle sphere, to be exactly half the difference. So this one is at minus 46, and this one we set to minus 23. So that's generally all you need. And we've set up a basic animation of spheres that we can use to drive all the rest of our effects. So nothing fancy there. Just something we need to make sure we have before we start working on any of the other elements. So at this point, my only question is there enough of a pause or a beat before the first pulse? And I think there is. And then do I feel like I'm trying to cram too many pulses into a short amount of time? And I'm actually pretty happy with this, because we see one pulse, it passes camera, and then there's a pretty decent beat where we get to watch the background before the next pulse comes. So by then it's already fading off quite obviously, and the next pulse is happening just after that. And then obviously that's just duplicated again. So I'm pretty happy with that. So with that done, we can actually get started properly on the EMP effects. So we'll carry on with that in the next video over here. So I'll see you then.